Hello everyone and my dear subscribers. So I've been getting a lot of questions on my previous video asking me what the permanent aura surrounding my paladin is. It is a relic gear set effect often used by support classes. Relic gear is basically like the Argus gear but higher grade, which you can start farming for starting from Vaulted normal and Vicus normal legion rates. At 2 sets, when you land an attack on an enemy, it gives you a 15% boost to gaining your identity gauge. At 4 sets, it provides 8% movement and attack speed buff to you and your allies for 16 seconds. And at 6 sets, it gives an 8% damage buff to you and your allies for 16 seconds. So as long as your allies get into the aura within 16 seconds, they have all the buffs permanently. This movement and attack speed buff is a tremendous help to classes who max on specialization and critical, such as Shock Regeneration Scrapper, Deathblow Strikers, or Igniter Sorcerers, because these builds don't use any swiftness. This is primarily why, if you ask me for recommendation between Taijutsu and Shock Regeneration build Scrapper, I recommend the Taijutsu build over Shock Regeneration before late tier 3. The Shock Regeneration build can really use some help for mobility from the support's gear set effects, or else it will be really clunky. And I'm sure you've heard classes like War Dancer really bloom later in the tier 3 as well. There are reasons like the gems, skill points, and runes too, but it's mainly due to the type of gear they use. So I'm going to give you guys a general rundown of all the gears. I'm not going to translate the effects one by one as I don't know what the effects will be translated to. And while some of them are pretty straightforward, some of them can be complicated to explain. Also, I will use some of the classes as examples to explain how the gear sets are used. But please do note that not all the classes I use as examples does not mean it's the meta, and not all of them will use the gear. People can mix the gears and use other gears as they please. I'm merely using the classes as examples to explain the gear set. And I will be translating the gears myself, so please note that they can be called by different titles when they do release. With that said, let's begin. This is the Betrayal set. The Betrayal set is basically what a lot of people will use in Chaos Dungeons. There are 3 different types of ether which generates either electric field, meteor, or lightning. When 3 different effects are gathered, you will get an extra effect which increases your attack speed by 40%, skill CD reduced by 50%, gets rid of debuff by chance, and mana and identity gauge recovers by 100% for a certain amount of time, probably around 10 to 12 seconds. Not that many people in KR use this set in raids, as the current meta in KR is to aim for DPS ceiling. This set is not bad to use in raids, but doesn't exactly let DPS classes to reach that ceiling. Next is a Nightmare set. With a 2 set, your mana usage is reduced by 50%, and the damage of the skills which use up mana is increased by 12%. With a 4 set, this is where it gets kinda complicated, but basically, using your Awakening skill will activate the gear set effects. The catch is, you want to keep your mana level above 30% for the additional 15% damage. With the 6 set, you do additional 15% damage. So in total, your damage increases by 42% with the 6 sets. However, when your mana drops below 30%, your damage buff turns into a bunch of cooldown and movement and attack speed buff. Usually, classes which use mana with high crit stats or self-crit rate will use this gear set. The classes include, but not limited to, sharpshooters, sorcerers, berserkers, and gunslingers. This is the Annihilation set. The Annihilation set is basically for back attack or head attack classes. With the 2 sets, you can get the crit damage buff of 17%, but when you land a head attack or back attack, this buff is replaced by a 55% crit damage buff. With the 4th set, the crit rate increases by 17%. And at 6 sets, you get a damage buff of 7%, but when you land a head attack or back attack, the 7% buff is replaced by 21% damage buff. To sum it up, the 6 Annihilation set, you can get 55% crit damage buff, 17% crit rate buff, and 21% damage buff. This would be one of the reasons why people say Strikers and Red Bill Gunlancers feel better with the Relic gear sets. The Hallucination set. This is a gear set which can be used by a lot of classes. With 2 sets, it gives you a 13% damage buff for 6 seconds and has a cooldown of 3 seconds. With 4 sets, the gear gives you a 15% crit rate buff, and when you land critical hits, the hits will extend the 2 set buff for 1 second. At 6 sets, when you maintain the 2 set buff for over 9 seconds, the buff will be maintained for 90 seconds and do additional 12% damage and crit rate of 5%. To sum it up, at 6 sets, the gear basically gives you 20% crit rate and 25% damage buff. As you can kind of tell, the gear is more generally used. A lot of classes can use this, however, the damage buff is not quite up there with other min-maxing gear sets. The newly added Salvation gear set. Smilegate did add this gear for more general use. Basically, when you land attacks, you can get a buff stack of 0.7% damage buff up to 20 stacks for 120 seconds. However, if you're attacked by the enemy when your HP is below 30%, all of your stacks are gone, but your spacebar cools will be reset and the damage you take is reduced by 30% for 8 seconds. At 4 sets, the damage buff becomes 1.4, and when you get to the max 20 stacks, your attack speed increases by 10%. At 6 sets, the damage buff becomes 2.1% up to 20 stacks, and at max stacks, there's another 5% damage buff. To sum it up, basically it takes about 10 to 20 seconds to turn on the effects of 47% damage buff and attack speed increase of 10%. The Domination gear set. At 2 sets, you get 1 extra awakening, and the cooldown for awakening is reduced by 20%. You basically turn on the gear set effects by using your awakening skill with 50% damage reduction on your awakening. However, your skill cools are reduced by 18% and your skill damage increases by 10% for 2 minutes. At 4 sets, you can use 1 more extra awakening and your CDs are reduced by another 18%. And your skill damage increases by additional 25%. At 6 sets, you can use 1 more extra awakening, your spacebar dash CD is reduced by 30%, and you get 2 minutes of 15% damage boost. To sum it up, at 6 sets, the number of times you can use your awakening increases to 6 times, but the point is that the only purpose of awakening with this gear is to turn on the gear set effects. Your skill CDs are reduced by 36% and your damage is increased by 50%. The prime example of a class who would use these gears are War Dancers and Energy Overflow Soul Fists. Since most of the War Dancers will go with full stack of swiftness and then either critical or specialization, your skills come back real quick after use. And since War Dancers have high crit rate, you don't have to worry about getting critical rate from the gears. By fully stacking swiftness along with gear set effects of 20% reduced CDs on your awakening, you are able to almost constantly run the 2-minute buff by using awakening every time the buff expires. And the Seduction set is basically the damage over time gear set in Lostark, but not that many classes are using this at the moment. Also, there's another support gear called the Destruction set, which gives bunch of endurance and some life recovery effect to the party members, but the support gear I explained at the very beginning are more generally used rather than the Destruction gear. So those were some of the Relic gear set effects which will really boost the class you're playing and the game experience in the near future. I might have made a video too early considering Western progression, but a lot of people were curious how their mains and alternative characters will play after a good amount of progression in Tier 3, so there, a brief explanation video about the gears. Hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.